All right, welcome, good morning. This is a training on HUD Habitability Standards that is applicable to ESG and SSVF funded permanent housing. So if you're doing ESG or SSVF funded rapid rehousing or homelessness prevention, this is going to be totally relevant to you. I'm going to start with introducing us as facilitators and then give HSA a little chance to do a little introduction, and then we'll dive into the agenda for today. So hi, my name's Eli, and I'm here with my co-presenter, Lily. And Lily's going to help with tech stuff. So if you have any tech questions, you can feel free to bug Lily with those. And you know, as you put stuff in the chat, if I'm missing stuff, Lily's going to try to keep track of that. We are with Home Base, and as I think most or all of you know, we are a nonprofit technical assistance provider. We work with the with HSA to support you all as homeless service providers with a series of free trainings like this one, and we also do some other sort of support visits and work with US providers. So that is us, and I want to give HSA Kalia a quick chance to do a further introduction.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Kalia Parrish with the Human Services Agency Center on Homelessness. And we, at our agency, work alongside your agencies as a funder through county contracts, and we also play a role in implementing the county strategic plan on homelessness. So I wanted to start off today by thanking you all for attending, and thank you for all the work you do in the community to help community members experiencing homelessness. And I know a lot of that is working with landlords as well to get your clients housed and help them remain stably housed. We're fortunate to have Home Base here offering this training on habitability standards, which, as they mentioned, will be relevant to all the ESG and SSVF funded programs, and to any of your programs that do permanent housing but voluntarily use the habitability standards to make sure that the units your clients are getting into are of good quality. So excited to have this training and to see you all here today. And I'll pass it back over to Home Base.
Awesome, thanks, Kalia. So I also want to give you all a chance to introduce yourselves so that we know who's in the room, but also so that you all can see which of your colleagues are here. So let's take a look at the agenda. So we've done introductions. We're going to do a little bit more introductions that are specific to this topic. I have a couple poll questions so we can get to know, what your comfort and interest levels are in habitability standards. And then we're going to just walk through what are the standards? What are you inspecting for when you inspect units? When do you have to do that? Who can do it? All of that good stuff. And then we have some time for either discussion of your specific questions, if you came with them, or if they come up during the training, and or some examples. So we'll figure out how to best use that time when we get there. We definitely have some examples to do some practice, but if folks have a lot of robust, I'm having this issue with the habitability standards, what would you do here? We can also spend the time doing that. So either or both. And then we will also talk about how do you document compliance? What does that look like? What do you need to be doing? Okay, so I'm going to put up. All right, thank you. And with that, we're going to get into minimum habitability standards. This is a pretty small group today, so as I'm talking, feel free to ask questions in the chat if that's easier for you or more comfortable, but also feel free to come off mute and ask your questions out loud. I do want to say that we are recording this training. You should have gotten that notice from Zoom. So if that plays into whether you don't want to have to listen to your own voice as you replay this recording later, we aren't recording the chat. That won't be part of the recording that we provide to the community. So feel free to ask questions there, but also we're not asking you to use the chat solely. You can come off mute if you're more comfortable that way. All right. So we are talking about two federal funding streams that have incredibly similar, almost exactly the same habitability standards requirements. We're going to start by talking about each of them separately. So for the ESG program, the habitability standards live in the ESG program interim rule. And the interim rule describes these as standards for safety, sanitation, and privacy. That guiding language is just good context to know why do these exist? What are the things we're trying to protect for our clients by doing this inspection, this review? And the habitability standards specifically apply to any activities you're doing under the rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention components, right? So there are a set of shelter standards that apply to ESG funded shelter. We are not going to be covering those today. We're going to be sticking with the permanent housing standards. So just wanted to call that out, that there are two separate sets of standards and we're focusing on PH. Again, still sticking with ESG, you cannot use ESG funding to do either to help someone remain in housing or move into a different or new housing unit that doesn't meet minimum habitability standards. This means that if you're using rental assistance or housing relocation and stabilization services, any of those funding options that are covered under rapid rehousing or homelessness prevention, either to help someone stay in housing or to help someone find new housing, whichever one you're doing, you need to do an inspection to ensure that the housing complies with these standards. Let's get a little more into the nuance. So if for example, rapid rehousing or homeless prevention services are being provided before a new unit has been identified, right? It's rapid rehousing, someone's looking for a new unit, you're providing them services. You don't have to inspect a unit that doesn't exist, right? This requirement doesn't come into play until someone has identified a unit. If once they do find a unit, you need to conduct that inspection before the participant signs the lease and before you provide any ESG assistance in that unit, right? So it needs to happen prior to move-in. There is, in some cases, right, you might be providing assistance, for example, for arrears in a prior unit, right? You want to cover rental arrears so someone can clear up their record or they can leave that unit without, consequences, right? You don't have to do a habitability inspection in those circumstances for that old unit, as long as that participant is going to rapidly be moved to a different unit, right? So if someone is in a unit, you're doing rental arrears so they can get out of that unit, and you're moving them to a new unit, you don't have to do a habitability inspections for both. You just need to do that for the new unit that they're moving into. But for one-time assistance, right? Even if it's not ongoing, even if it's just a security deposit, one-time rental assistance, you still have to do, right? If someone's going to be staying in that unit, if this is the unit they're living in or going to be living in, you have to do that habitability standards review. So there are only very specific instances where you might not have to do a review where you're providing assistance. And finally, what we're covering is specifically the minimum standards for this assistance. There may be stricter local laws around things like fire codes, carbon monoxide detector requirements, water and air temperature, and you should be familiar with all of those local requirements. If there are requirements from, if you are a subrecipient and the requirements that the direct recipient has, if your agency has standards that are more robust, or if there are local laws that govern some of these things, you need to be aware of those and also checking for those things. Any questions about ESG and when or how these habitability standards apply? No, seeing some thinking faces and seeing some head shakes. So it does not look like we have any questions at this time. Then let's talk about SSVF. For SSVF, you have to do this habitability standards inspection whenever you are using funds to provide rental assistance, utility fees, security deposits, utility deposits, right? You're assisting a unit and the client is moving into a new or different unit, right? In this case, new means new to the client, a unit that they were not previously living in. So for SSVF, there isn't really a requirement to do this type of review if you're helping someone stay in a unit. It's specifically for moving to a new unit, so it's slightly different. Any questions about SSVF applicability?
Could you be so kind to tell me what is the meaning of SSVF?
Thank you for that question. That's calling me on something that I should have prepped for in advance. So SSVF is supportive services for veterans families, for veteran families. I don't know if there's an S. And it's a funding stream specifically for veterans in the sort of veteran world, and it provides things like homelessness prevention and rapid rehousing assistance. So it's one of those programs like COC rapid rehousing, ESG rapid rehousing, SSVF rapid rehousing. They're kind of like bizarro world alternates of each other. They're very similar in some ways, very different in others, and they just happen to overlap with the ESG program for this. And ESG, of course, stands for Emergency Solutions Grants, for anybody who didn't know that acronym.
Thank you.
Any other questions so far? All right. This is a question that we get a lot for both habitability standards and for the COC program's HQS standards. So for you all, for the habitability standards, pretty much any of your staff can conduct an inspection. You don't need to be certified. You can have your own program staff do it. You can pay someone else to do it. You can have your funding agency, if they do it, that's fine. If you are combining your funding with another federal subsidy program and they also have to do an inspection that, and this is very important, an inspection that will meet these standards, then you can have your partners do the inspection. As long as somebody is inspecting this unit and you can document that it happened and that it met the habitability standards and it sort of checked off all those boxes, you should be good to go. All right. Now we're getting into the standards themselves. There are, on the one hand, you could say there's a long list of standards. On the other hand, anybody who is familiar with the Continuum of Care Program HQS or Housing Quality Standards will think, oh, wow, this is just such a tiny list of standards to review. And I wanna sort of put a point on that. If anybody is familiar with the COC HQS standards, the housing quality standards, it's a completely different set of standards. And something to keep in mind is that HQS is much more robust in most ways. And so we often get the question, well, if I have to meet the habitability standards, but I'm used to doing HQS inspections for all my other projects, can I just do HQS inspections for my ESG grants? And the answer is, HQS is much more robust in most ways. And so for most of these standards, HQS will check the box. But notably, the habitability standards are more specific for fire safety. So it's important to note that you need to meet these standards. And if you're doing HQS review or some other more robust review, just compare what you're actually reviewing to these standards and make sure that everything is actually included in that review. Just because it feels more robust and takes more time and has more checkboxes doesn't necessarily mean it's gonna meet all of these standards. So what you might end up doing is just adding something to a more robust review that you're already doing to make sure that it also meets habitability standards. Okay, so we're gonna walk through these, and I'll pause at each slide to see if anybody has questions or maybe examples of a time when you found something that didn't meet the standards in these areas, so we can have some illustrations from real life. So first, excuse me, structure and materials. It's of course very important that the unit, the housing, is structurally sound. It's going to be protective from the elements. You know, it's going to keep out extreme cold. It's going to keep out, you know, rain and snow and, you know, all of the things that shouldn't be in our living spaces. And just make sure that the structure itself isn't going to pose a threat to the health and safety of residents. So if you're worried that parts of the roof might fall in, or there are, you know, dangerous, you know, it's substandard construction, and you're worried about the stability of the structure itself, definitely a reason to fail an inspection. This next one is actually, this is the one place where the habitability standards differ a little bit between ESG and SSVF. This access piece is only found in the regulations that apply to SSVF. That said, it's a pretty good thing to make sure is true of any unit you're inspecting. It seems like a pretty important piece. So the access is just, the housing has to be accessible, right? The person has to be able to get into it and use it without trespassing. You know, they need to be able to access their unit without either trespassing or asking permission every time. If someone else legally controls their access to their own housing, that's not meeting habitability standards for SSVF, and probably also an unacceptable unit for ESG, even though that's not part of the technical standards. Now we're going to move on to space and security. So the unit needs to be able to, needs to provide adequate space and security for the residents of the unit and their belongings, right? So a very tiny unit, not going to be enough for, you know, both the space and security of the person living in it. And each resident of the unit has to have an acceptable place to sleep, right? So again, comparing and contrasting to the COC program HQS standards, for those folks who are familiar with them. There are standards in the HQS that say things like, you have to have one sleeping room for every 2 people. These habitability standards don't get that specific, but they do say everybody has to have an acceptable place to sleep. So you're looking for things like, is someone going to be sleeping on the floor? That is very clearly not an acceptable place to sleep. If someone has a bed but chooses to sleep on the floor, that's totally fine, but they have to have the option of a bed, a pull-out bed, you know, a place that is an acceptable place for a human to sleep. And this is all, you know, a lot of this is very much on the sort of reasonable person, right? As an inspector, what is an acceptable place to sleep? I want to note here that often there are local habitability standards or requirements. So some homeless systems of care set up written policies and procedures that say, you know, this is our standard for occupancy limits in the community. Sometimes there are local, like city-based occupancy limits. Often they're based on square footage. So I just want to call out that this standard is very vague. There may be more specific standards that apply in some of the areas you're working in. First question is, are there any questions about this? Anything that's come up for you where you've been reviewing a unit and it's not clear whether they meet these, or any questions based on what I just went over? Seeing head shakes. All right. Again, can anybody think of, like, when you see these things, if you've done habitability standards inspections before, have you ever encountered anything weird in these areas or examples of places where things haven't complied? Have you ever experienced a structure that seemed not structurally sound or a space that was too small? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. These seem like pretty low bars, right? It's gonna be remarkable when you are in the Bay Area, finding an apartment that doesn't seem structurally sound, but it's definitely, those apartments are out there. Okay, moving on to some more, quality of life things. So interior
Hey,
air.
Eli,
Yeah, go for it.
can I add one thing? So you had mentioned that local communities may have standards in place. Just a good reminder that yes, as a COC, we do have standards applicable to rapid rehousing providers, which I can send out to the group following the training, but we do specify maximum occupancy by unit size in those standards. I think in this case in alignment with HQS.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Clea.
And we do leave, some room for discretion on the part of the provider on a case-by-case basis. But just wanted to note that we do have that as a community standard over and above, the funding specific standards.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that that local knowledge, and a good example of how it's always important to know all of the policies that apply to your projects. All right, so moving on to interior air quality. This is what you're looking for here is that in every room or space in the unit or in the house, there is a means of ventilation, right? We don't want any rooms that are where airflow can't happen. That creates potentially dangerous situations. Level that might threaten or harm the health of residents. Now, if you're doing a lot of inspections, there are devices that your agency can get that will measure, pollutant levels in the air quality. If you don't have that type of device, if you're not doing a lot of habitability standards inspections, or it's just not something that you have the budget for, this is also, right, you're checking for, can I smell smog in this room for some reason? Is there, is there dust, like a constant cloud of dust coming in, right? Can I see, can I smell, can I tell when I'm breathing that this is going to be a dangerous situation? But of course, right, the way to be sure is to have a device that measures it, but not everybody does, and it's not a requirement of the regulations that you use a particular device. Then water supply that's free of contamination. This is very important. Again, this is something that is you probably can't be 100% sure from a visual inspection, but that is a good place to start. So if the water runs and it's not clear, if it's particularly cloudy, it's also good to check for any water advisories for a particular area. I don't know if this is particularly common in the Bay Area, but I know that there are places in, in Arizona and other places that I have lived or worked in where there are frequent water advisories. So checking for things like that. And then sanitary facilities. So this is things like, is there a bathroom that's functioning? Is there running water? Things like that. And are all of those things working? Are they private, right? So we're not looking for a shared shower and bathroom facility that doesn't have a door that you can close. Are they adequate, right? Is somebody going to be able to keep themselves clean and hygienic using these facilities? So yeah, this is your thing where this is the piece where you're looking for a functioning toilet, a shower, running water, sinks for hand washing, things like that. Any questions or experiences to share, tricky things that you've seen about any of these pieces? Seeing some head shakes. All right. Always appreciate that.
Just to clarify, for the privacy, it's just that they're able to have privacy. It's not that they can't have like a shared bathroom, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. If the thing that jumped into my head was like a bathroom on a hallway where there's no door, right? So like in I'm thinking of like an SRO type situation where, it's the building's run down and there's no door on the bathroom, not okay.
Got it.
Or if someone, for example, if there was a unit in a public high school, right, and the only showers were those big shared showers, and for some reason somebody was living in a public high school, it's not going to happen. But it's an example, right? Like big open shared showers, for some reason, not private. But yeah,
Got
if
it.
it's
Thank
just
you.
shared facilities, as long as you can have privacy, that's fine. Okay. The next couple are about sort of heating, lighting, things like that. So the thermal environment piece is about necessary heating or cooling facilities, and are they in proper operating condition? So for this piece, this is specifically necessary heating or cooling facilities, right? So in a lot of places in the Bay Area, historically, we have not necessarily needed air conditioning because in a lot of places like for example, in coastal areas, the temperature may not ever get high enough that air conditioning is needed. If we were looking in some places in the Central Valley, where temperatures are starting to get dangerously high in some cases, right? Maybe you might consider air conditioning to be necessary. But that, again, is a judgment call. There is no bright line because this federal funding, is administered across the country. And so they have to develop standards that are applicable based on the location you're in. So I just wanted to call out that the heating and cooling facilities that are necessary do depend on the environment and the sort of weather conditions, the temperature conditions that you expect. And if they're necessary, and if you're going to need them, if you're going to need to be able to cool your living space or heat your living space, then you want to make sure that those things actually work, and that if they're in the unit. And then for illumination and electricity, so the places that we live in should have light. You need to be able to have enough light to allow for normal use of living space, and to be safe and healthy, right? You need to be able to see where you're going. You need to be able to see any potential hazards. You need to be able to conduct your normal activities. And also human beings should not live in darkness. That's not good for our physical or our emotional health. So just making sure, right, if there's not great natural light, making sure you have electric lights. Just making sure that there is light. And then for electricity, right, there needs to be electricity in the unit, and there needs to be enough outlets, enough access to electricity to safely use electrical appliances within the unit. You need to be able to plug something in and use it without the plug exploding. So you're looking for electrical outlets that exist and that are not damaged, don't have wires sticking out, things like that. And depending on the size of the unit, are there enough opportunities to use electricity? One outlet for a unit is probably not sufficient. But again, this is all, about, the context, the situation, who's going to be in the unit, how many people, what the size is, but you're looking for volume and safety. Any questions, comments about these pieces?
What if the property owner or manager says, there's no electricity in the unit right now, but once the tenant moves in, they'll get the electricity turned on?
Yeah, that should be okay, right? As long as you're able to, I think the challenge there is confirming that the electricity does work. But a lot of times, the electricity gets turned on when someone starts paying for it. I think, oh, that's actually a little bit more complicated a question than I thought it was initially when I started answering. So we're gonna write that down, Lily, if you don't mind, and send out like a firm answer, because I'm now inclined to think that if you can't confirm that the electricity works, that may be an issue, but I will confirm. Yeah, so that was my non-answer, but we'll get back to you. Any other questions? I appreciate Lily's guilt tripping in the chat, trying to get me my question allotment for the day.
Never too early to start with the guilt trips, I say.
You have a question, Sophia?
No, not really. Just because we normally do inspections before, obviously, we have someone, and it's a requirement that our landlord has to have PG&E on to do our inspection. Right. It's requirement. Because we don't know if the stuff going to be electric and it's not working, or all the plugs are working. So we need to have from the inspection is requirement electricity when we do inspection.
Yeah.
I have a question, actually.
Yeah, go for it.
I've had clients where they move into apartment complexes and the apartment says their electricity bill is in with their rental bill. Mm-hmm. They combine it. But I've had one client or two clients that live together, they're brothers. They're in a one-bedroom apartment, and they were told by the managers that they had this bill they were paying each month, which was over $200. They thought that was covering their electrical, their water, gas, all the rest. But they come to find out they owe PG&E money now. So I referred to legal services. I didn't know what else to do. Do you have any idea how they could handle a situation like that? I know it's kind of off subject, sorry.
No, it's a great question. I definitely think a referral to legal services sounds really appropriate and a good step there. Lily, do you happen to I don't want to put you on the spot, but I don't have a better answer than that.
So just the question being, what do you do if you owe money for bills that you were not benefiting from paying for the service?
Yeah,
I would definitely. Yeah. Sorry, what'd you say?
They were saying it just wasn't clear. They thought they were paying it and it wasn't being paid.
Yeah, I would say that, and actually there's some good fair housing kind of knowledgeable folks on here too, but to me, that definitely seems like I would start with legal services. If needed, I might reach out to a fair housing organization as well. Cause and it seems even like a little bit of an overlap, tenants' rights kind of law, and then consumer kind of law, but I think that there's probably some sort of mediation or option to figure that out. I think there would be folks who would recognize that it's a worthwhile thing to try to help sort it out than to have it be like a punitive thing. So a hassle, I would say, but sounds like your referral is a great place to start.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, let's see, moving on. So food preparation. This is your kitchen, kitchenette, whatever the food preparation space is. It has to be able to prepare and serve food in a way that is safe and sanitary, right? So this is again, a very sort of broadly stated requirement. It's not super specific. For this type of review, right, you're looking for always things that are unsafe in the kitchen area. If there's no functional way to prepare food, if everything is broken, or if key pieces are broken, if, again, you're looking for things like a functioning sink to provide water, can you store food safely in a cold, in a fridge of some kind? Do you have a way to heat and cook food? Things like that. For some of these pretty generic, broad standards, what I sometimes hear folks doing is referring to more specific higher standards sometimes, or just more specific standards, things like the HQS, where there's a more specific set of standards for kitchen areas and food preparation in the HQS. So if you're looking for that more specific guidance to be able to provide staff and you don't already have it, pulling stuff in that is comparable or meets these standards but is more specific from other review frameworks is a strategy that I've seen used. Yeah, and then sanitary conditions, right? Is the general maintenance of the housing clean, safe, and not going to impact folks' health? So I'm thinking things like in an apartment building, right, or a shared unit, are the common areas, are there things like standing water? Are there things like, like exposed electrical wires in other parts of the building? Are there leaky pipes, right? Bad smells, mold growing, right? Is all of the spaces within the building, not just the unit, though definitely the unit, but all the spaces maintained in a sanitary way? Any comments, tips, or questions about either the food prep or the sanitary conditions piece? Nope. Okay. And finally, we have fire safety. So I just wanted to note this second means of exiting the building. This is present for both ESG and SSVF. It's just, for some reason, located in a different place in the regulations for SSVF. So this is actually under access for SSVF. I love how these very similar requirements are just slightly different, just to keep us on our toes. So for fire safety, there has to be multiple means of exiting the building in case of fire. So in case the door is blocked, maybe there's a window with a fire escape, or maybe there's a back door. There needs to be another way of exiting a building, or at least two ways of exiting a building to escape fire. The unit has to have a smoke detector, at least one, and it needs to work. So you're going to need to test the smoke detector, and you need to have like at least one for a unit, but you should probably be checking for, if this is a particularly large unit, right? If it's a, a family unit, are there smoke detectors located where they're going to actually pick up smoke throughout the unit? And then specifically, it's called out that you want to locate a smoke detector in a hallway adjacent to a bedroom, right? So, but the idea being, if people are asleep, you want the detector to go off to prevent before the fire gets to their room, or as quickly as possible to alert them when there's a smoke danger while they're sleeping. Something that is important to sort of it's important to understand what this means before you actually have to do it. So if you have a client who's hard of hearing, you need to make sure that that particular unit for that particular client has a smoke detector, a smoke alarm system that works for people who are hard of hearing. And so knowing what that looks like, what the options are, what you're looking for, and what you need to ask the landlord for is important. Even if you don't currently have clients that are hard of hearing, it's good to know what you're going to need to do if you are in that situation. And then you're also looking for smoke detectors, not just in the specific private unit, but also in public areas. So we want to make sure that if a public part of the building, a shared part of the building is on fire or has smoke danger, that's also going to be to alert the tenants. Those are all of the minimum safety standards. So it's 10 for SSVF, it's 11. They are generally speaking framed very broadly. That's for a reason. So as I mentioned, a lot of these federal standards, because they have to apply across the country, they're left broad to account for context of what the unit looks like, what type of unit it is, the size of the unit, the size of the household, the geographic location and conditions of the unit. Any questions, comments about any of that? Fire safety, anything else we've covered? All right. Then this is our time for either discussion or some examples that I have, or both. If anybody does have like a specific example or a challenge that they've had, or a question, like a concrete example that you have that you'd like to discuss, you should feel free to put that in the chat or come off mute, but I think it would be helpful to have the description in the chat. Speaking of the chat, it looks like Kalia has posted the occupancy standards, occupancy limits that were adopted by the COC. So if you're interested in the occupancy standards that apply to your rapid rehousing program, they're in the chat. And yeah, feel free to put in the chat any specific case examples or questions that you have as we go through some practice and application. So I have some photos. These photos are not of units in the Bay Area. They are not of actual units that clients have tried to secure. And they are not in photos of entire units, right? I didn't do walkthroughs of these. These are just open source photos from the internet. But I want to use them to prompt, like, what are we looking for? Not necessarily, we're not necessarily going to be able to confirm whether these examples pass the inspection or not, but we will have, I think they will raise questions. What are we concerned about? What do we want to look for? What do we want to know more about? So for this unit, right, looking at it from this perspective, does anything jump out at you as, oh, if I'm doing my inspection, I am concerned about this piece or these pieces?
Window. Ventilation.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Does it from this perspective, I can't see any ventilation for this unit aside from, I guess, whatever door we're standing in, which is not going to be open all the time. Yeah. Any other questions? Any other concerns?
Illumination and electricity.
Yeah. Yeah. And can you sort of speak to what are you seeing that makes you concerned about that?
On the right-hand side of the room, that lamp is not on. So I wonder if it's just not on or if there's no plug there.
Yeah. Right. You want to check, like, is there a plug? Is the plug broken? We have this fan as well. Can we turn that fan on? Is there actually electricity? Yeah, definitely. And the fact that we don't see windows in this view and they are relying entirely on that artificial light makes that both an electricity and a light issue for sure. Anything else jump out at y'all?
I
There's
think
no-
depending on number of people, whether the unit is big enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. It's hard to judge size here. If this is a one person even, I think being in the space would be important, of course, to see if it's big enough. Yeah.
And the 2 exits for fire safety.
Yeah, for sure. Again, it's unclear, but if we're assuming that this is most of the unit, right? It's a small, studio or 1 bedroom. It's unclear whether there's anything but the door we presumably walked in to take this picture. Yeah. Things we can't at all get any sense of from this picture are obviously things like food preparation, water supply, sanitary facilities. It's unclear whether there's a working bathroom here. It looks to me a little bit like a log cabin, so I would be concerned if there are there indoor working facilities in this place. Hopefully, inspecting for an outhouse versus an indoor facility is not something you're doing a lot of in the Bay Area, but we do want to see adequate indoor plumbing facilities for that. Okay, next image. So this is an image from outside of the unit. So again, we're not going to be able to check for a lot of the things, but what jumps out at you from this image?
Structure.
Yeah, for me too, right? What are the things you're seeing that make you concerned about that?
Oh, I don't know anything about construction, but some of this looks a little shady. Like it looks like there's different kinds of materials kind of put together. Yeah, it just, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, this raises especially, so this is, again, is not a picture from the Bay Area, but especially in an area like ours where there is earthquake risk, this raises questions for me about building code compliance. And, the standards don't say it has to comply with the local building codes, but it should, and that is that's an aspect of safety. So that's one route maybe to explore this more, right? I don't know anything about construction, but looking to local standards for materials, earthquake safety, stuff like that can be helpful guides to determine whether a structure is safe for sure. What else?
It looks like there's broken windows and broken screen and just not, I don't know, rot in the wood. It's not good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on the inside of this building, I would definitely be checking for sanitary conditions, which, the outside of the building sometimes is much worse than the inside. The inside may be perfectly fine, but it's a flag. And yeah, those broken windows, right? That's safety. And also there's the, thermal environment, right? The temperature of the unit. Can you control that effectively and appropriately? And are you protected from the elements in this unit? And it looks like maybe not. Yeah. All right, last image. So Any questions raised for you about this? Any things you're concerned about? Just again, from the outside of the unit, I think we're assuming that everything pictured here is connected to the unit or associated with the unit.
The wiring looks very unsafe, where they have cables running across. I'd be worried about that. And also the windows being with metal on them, you can't escape from that if there was a fire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. So we're looking to make sure, is there actually a second exit? Are there multiple exits in case of a fire? For sure. The wiring, right? That I think to me speaks to, is the internal wiring going to be safe as well, and is it reliable? Right? Is this a job like my parents' home that was done by the previous owner who was an electrician but did not work to professional standards in his own home? Right. So like, is this work that was done in a way that makes the electricity unsafe or unreliable? For sure. Yeah.
Safety and security as well as environment. So safety, I don't know what's happening down below with those doors that look like they flip up, if that's going to access a basement that has access to the house. And then it looks like there's a lot of moisture at the bottom of the unit. That looks like it's been recently repaired, hopefully. I'm not sure, but I'd probably check for mold on the interior as a result of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Is this a systemic sort of ongoing concern, that whatever caused the repair down here, was it fixed or was it just patched? For sure. Yeah. And then, yeah, these open space, what do they give access to? Does this give access to the unit? Because yeah, definitely safety and security issues. Could be, again, protection from the elements issues. If there's, if there's living space downstairs, there could be issues with light in the unit, right? You want to make sure there's no natural light here. So is there sufficient artificial light? Yeah, definitely. All good flags. All right. The last piece that we're going to cover is about documenting compliance. And we touched on this at the beginning of the training, but again, if you've done the review, you need to document it, or else your funder is not going to know that you did the review. And for documenting compliance, helpfully, there are standard forms that HUD provides for each of these, for ESG and then for SSVF. You don't have to use these forms that we're going to show you. So this is the form for documenting compliance for ESG. You don't have to use them, but if you're looking for a form, these are created by HUD and they are compliant. And you can, it lays out the minimum standards. You can mark approved or deficient. And there's space on the form for like a certification and a date that it was completed. Does anybody use this form, or if you don't use this form, do you use another form? And can you tell us a little bit about what you use? Yeah.
Well, above services use the standard inspection form for food. It's the first time that I'm seeing this one, but for sure I'm gonna check. Maybe we can work also with this one. But normally, the whole organization, we have the same standards and the same paperwork, and came from whole.
Yeah. And that actually is probably a really good way of doing it, right? As long as whatever your internal agency's forms are cover these standards, then it's great to use your own forms. They can be, they can be easily trained on. It sounds like you use the same across the entire agency, potentially for multiple funding streams, right? So you might have, is that right? Or is it ESG specific?
No, the standards inspections are the same for all rapid programs.
Yeah.
And also right. For
we've frozen a little bit, but I think the answer is you have standard inspection that you do across funding streams. which again can be great as long as it, it will have been reviewed to meet the requirements for each funding stream that you're using it for. That can bring in those more robust standards from each piece, right? So you're actually doing a better, fuller review and more detailed review for each unit, which is great. Any other thoughts or questions about forms that you use? Do other folks use sort of agency created forms, things that your organizations have created or local versions?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, great. That's great. Yeah. Again, this is an example of a form. It's just the top of the form for SSVF. The headings here have links to the sources we got these. It's again for SSVF, same thing. This form is provided in the guidebook, in the SSVF guidebook, but you don't have to use this form as long as you are documenting. You have a written form or something that you're filling out that clearly documents compliance in alignment with those SSVF standards, dated, signed, and in the client files. All right. That's all that we have about habitability standards. I hope that this was a helpful either introduction or refresher. And if anybody has any final questions, I welcome that. You have a lot of folks here who have been doing these inspections for a while, it sounds like. So if you have practical implementation questions, feel free to ask them now. And while we keep it open for those final questions, I'm going to ask Lily, could you grab the link to the survey? Do you have that accessible to you?
Yes, I lost it, but I will relocate it and post it in 1 sec.
Excellent. So Lily is just going to put in the Slack a link to our standards there it is, it's in the chat, standard feedback survey. So I know this is a relatively short training, but we very, very, very much for all of our trainings read your feedback, we value your feedback, and we use your feedback to make changes in future trainings. So we'd love it if you could just take some time, because we ended a little early now, to fill out those feedback forms. Your evaluations, right, satisfied, not satisfied, very satisfied, are super informative for us. But what really, really gets us that good stuff is your written comments. So if there's anything that you would like to have covered in a future training, anything we did in this training that didn't really work for you, anything that could make it better, anything you really liked, let us know, because we want to make these super useful for you. All right. So if the unit initially meets the habitability standards, but later during the tenancy ceases to meet the standards, what then? Yeah, it's a great question. So it is your responsibility to make sure that units continue to meet standards while you're supporting them. The what then, right? Specifically, what steps do you take is it's similar to what you might do working with a landlord to try to cure things before someone signs a lease. You want to try to work with the landlord to fix the things that are a problem, that are not compliant. But if you can't get that fixed, right? If enforcement isn't possible, if the landlord's not working with you, these standards really do call out things that are essential, right, to have a safe unit. And so like the most extreme response may be locating another unit for that client if you can't get these things fixed. Do other folks have ways that you approach, if a unit stops meeting habitability standards, right? You come for a visit and there's, the client says, my electricity hasn't been working. I only have one outlet that's been working for the past 3 weeks, right? What kind of stuff do you do?
Well, in our case, definitely we reach out the landlord to fix what needs to be fixed. It's a duty for landlords in this case.
Yeah, definitely. And where landlords are resistant and don't want to comply, are there strategies that you all use for that? Do you reach out to legal services? Does anybody ever use the building code, the city building inspection process?
But definitely there are cases that maybe we can reach that level, but normally for safety, they know they have to be fixed. And also because we work with those landlords, maybe in the future we can use the units. We help them to maintain the units in good shape. So it's like a mutual commitment that they help us to maintain the units in the same standards. In order that, we won't, like a team in this case with landlord. In my experience, we never reached the legal level, but definitely good communication with landlords since day one, sign the lease, that helps.
Yeah, that's great. And Sophia, thank you for making the point about just like the landlord, like this is a place where having that good landlord relationship and communication from the beginning really pays off for sure. Yeah. If you have to ask them to do something that is their responsibility, makes it a lot easier to have that conversation. Any other final questions? Okay, great. Well, we're gonna thank you so much for your time. And as Kalia said at the top, thank you so much for your work that you do every day, all year round. I'm gonna give another plug to that feedback survey. We'd love it if you could fill it out. So just go ahead and grab that link if you don't have time now. And thank you. I hope you have a great rest of your day.